What would you do if the person you buried for 3 years walked back into your life? Rachel had cried at his funeral. She'd scattered his ashes into the ocean he loved. She'd rebuilt her entire life around the fact that her husband was gone. But Michael wasn't gone. He was 3 states away, living under a different name. 3 years earlier, Michael and Rachel looked like the couple everyone envied. They'd been married for 8 years. He worked long hours at a finance firm downtown. She ran a small design studio from home. From the outside, their life looked stable, comfortable, even enviable. But behind closed doors, Michael had been drowning for years. The finance job he took to provide for their future had buried him in a debt he never told her about. He'd taken out loans against accounts she didn't know existed. Every month, the gap between what he owed and what he earned grew wider. And every month, the silence grew heavier. Rachel noticed him pulling away, but she assumed it was work stress. She'd ask if he was okay, and he'd smile and say he was fine. He wasn't fine. He was calculating, almost nightly, how many more months he had before the truth surfaced and everything they'd built collapsed. It started as a dark joke he told himself during a sleepless night. What if he just disappeared? No confrontation, no admitting failure, no watching her face when she learned the truth. Over weeks, the joke stopped feeling like a joke. It started to feel like a plan. Michael began researching quietly, late at night, in incognito browser tabs. Pseudocide, the act of faking one's own death, was more common than people realized. Men who felt financially or emotionally trapped simply vanished, sometimes leaving cars at bridges, sometimes staging drownings. He read every case study he could find, taking mental notes like it was a business plan. Over the following months, Michael moved money into an account Rachel didn't know about. He photographed documents he'd need. He researched a small coastal town 3 states away where no one would recognize him. To Rachel, nothing seemed different. He was simply working late more often than before. The night before he disappeared, Michael cooked dinner for the first time in months. Rachel remembered feeling relieved. She thought whatever had been distant about him lately was finally passing. She had no idea she was eating what she'd later realize was a goodbye dinner. He didn't tell her. He couldn't. The next morning, Michael told Rachel he was going for an early swim before work, something he'd done 100 times before. He left his phone on the nightstand. He left his wedding ring on the bathroom sink. By noon, his clothes were found folded neatly on the beach, but Michael was nowhere to be found. Rachel called the police within hours. Search boats combed the coastline for 3 days. Neighbors brought food. Friends took shifts sitting with her so she wouldn't be alone. Every hour that passed without a body made the not knowing worse than grief itself. After 3 weeks, authorities declared Michael legally presumed dead. Rachel held a funeral with no body to bury. She stood at the front of a small chapel, reading a eulogy for a man who was, at that very moment, checking into a motel 400 miles away under a different name. 3 states away, Michael rented a small apartment above a hardware store. He grew a beard. He took a job under a fake identity, paying in cash whenever he could. For the first time in years, he told himself he felt lighter, no debt collectors, no fear of Rachel's face when she learned the truth. But some nights the guilt caught up to him anyway. 8 months after the funeral, Rachel received the life insurance payout, nearly $400,000. She used part of it to pay off the mysterious debts she'd only just discovered in his name. She had no idea that the debts were the very reason he vanished in the first place. 2 years passed. Rachel slowly rebuilt her life. She sold the house they'd shared, moved to a smaller apartment, and began cautiously dating again. She still thought about Michael, sometimes not the version who vanished, but the version she married, the version she believed had loved her. It happened at a gas station 3 states away. Rachel's cousin was on a work trip and stopped to fill up her tank. She glanced toward the convenience store and froze. A bearded man paying at the counter moved exactly like Michael used to move. She told herself it was impossible, but she took a photo anyway, just in case. When Rachel saw the photo, her hands began to shake. The beard was different. The clothes were different. But the eyes, the posture, the way he stood with his weight on one leg, it was unmistakably him. For the first time in 2 years, the grief she thought she'd buried turned into something else entirely, rage. Rachel didn't go to the police right away. She hired a private investigator instead, someone experienced in insurance fraud cases. Within 3 weeks, he confirmed what she already suspected. Michael was alive, living under the name David Hensley, working construction jobs for cash in a small town none of them had ever heard of before. Rachel didn't call the police first. She drove 400 miles herself. She sat outside the small rented apartment for 2 hours before she found the courage to knock. When Michael opened the door and saw her face, he didn't run. He didn't lie. He just said her name like a man finally exhaling after years of holding his breath. Michael told her everything: the debt, the shame, the plan that started as a dark joke and slowly became real. He said he thought disappearing would hurt her less than watching him fail. Rachel stood in the doorway, unable to decide if she wanted to scream or cry. In the end, she did both. Cases like Michael's are more common than most people assume. Psychologists call it pseudocide, the deliberate faking of one's own death to escape debt, legal trouble, or emotional pressure. It's most often driven not by cruelty, but by extreme conflict avoidance. For some people, disappearing feels easier than facing the shame of failure in front of someone they love. Underneath pseudocide cases, researchers often find a pattern of avoidant personality traits, a deep discomfort with confrontation, an inability to tolerate perceived judgment, and a tendency to see escape as the only solution to overwhelming shame. It isn't always about malice toward the person left behind. Often it's about an inability to face themselves. But that explanation doesn't erase the damage. For the person left behind, the grief is real, even when the death isn't. Rachel had genuinely mourned a person who was alive the entire time. Her nervous system had processed loss, guilt, and trauma for something that, in the end, was a choice, not a tragedy. Rachel eventually did go to the police. Faking one's own death isn't illegal by itself, but the life insurance payout was fraud, and Michael was charged accordingly. He was ordered to repay the insurance company in full and faced probation. The financial freedom he'd tried to buy through disappearing cost him even more than the debt he ran from. Rachel never went back to him. She said the version of him she loved died the day he chose to disappear, rather than tell her the truth. She filed for divorce from a man the state had once declared legally dead. In some strange way, she said, she finally understood the term closure because this time she got to choose it herself. Michael thought disappearing would protect the people he loved from his failure. Instead, it took away their chance to face it together. Sometimes the things we run from are smaller than the damage we cause by running. If you've ever felt the pull to disappear rather than face the truth, you're not as alone as you think. Comment ICIT if you've ever felt the pull to run instead of face the truth.